begin transmission. So here's a strange thought, but bear with me for a minute. What if, when we got to this planet, we encountered humans? There were people on this planet, but not just any people. When we got here, we recognized the people who were here. They were some of the greatest villains in all of human history. So people like Adolf Hitler or Tom Brady, people who have caused untold suffering to millions upon millions of people. But that's not all. Among these people weren't just villains, but there were also heroes. People like Mr. Rogers or Tom Brady, people who have caused tremendous joy and inspiration and hope for millions of people. What would we do with these recognizable villains and heroes from Earth's history? Would we come in and would we wipe them all out? Would we kill them all? Would we save them all? Would we elevate them all? Would we welcome them all with open arms? This is a strange thought for sure, but I feel like if that was really Adolf Hitler, we wouldn't welcome him with open arms, and if it was really Mr. Rogers, we wouldn't kill him just because he was a human. Adolf Hitler was a human. So here's what I'm getting at. There are millions upon millions of species of insects, trillions of individuals. By weight, there are more insects on this planet than any other. And Earth was just like this. And not that long ago, less than 1,000 years ago, it was only about 500-600 years ago that the insect apocalypse really happened. So what do we do now that we're here? I feel like we kind of have a chance to kind of redo Earth's past, because when we look at the insects, although many of the species are different, well, first of all, we haven't gotten to catalog all the species yet. Not even Charlie. There's so many insects that not even Charlie has been able to name and describe all the species, and that's what he was built for. So even though he can do 10,000 a day, we're still way far behind where we need to be to understand the diversity of life here. But what we can tell for sure is that the roles that insects play in this world are very similar to the roles they played on Earth. So there are parasites, there are pollinators, there are aquatic insects and terrestrial insects, there are heroes, and there are villains. And what I think we have an opportunity here for is to evaluate how Earth and its people treated its insect inhabitants, and how we will treat the insect inhabitants of this world. Because when we come here, we can really do whatever we want. There's no life form here, at least as far as we've discovered, that can stop us. We have complete power over nature. At the same time, that should fill us with a sense of complete responsibility for nature. It's not necessarily a power to subjugate and exploit. It should be a responsible power to foster and care. So, how do we do that with insects? Do we want to come to this world and make it like Earth is now? No flowers, no insects, just a kind of a destitute gray world without the diversity of life? Or do we want it to be a world like it was in, the late second millennium, where you had millions of people dying from insect-related diseases, and you had crop pests and famines and locust plagues all caused by insects? Can we do better? And how do we do better? I feel like the answer here is that we remove the villains or rehabilitate them in some way, and we love the heroes. And that seems to be a much more responsible way of looking at life here on this planet, as opposed to just coming in and destroying everything, because they're all insects, heroes and villains alike. Or, on the other hand, welcoming them all, because you have heroes, and so they're all fine. So I feel like we need to be honest with the insects and ourselves about the insects, because there are some heroes and there are some villains. So today what I want to really discuss, we're going to go through some insect species, and most of these I've drawn from Earth's histories, and some of them might be familiar to you, simply because we haven't documented all the insect species on this planet yet. But these are insects from Earth's history, and we have those same ecological roles on this planet. Some of them have killed millions of people, some of them have saved millions of people. And so as we think about this, I want you to evaluate what should our response as spacefaring voyagers coming upon this new planet, what should our response be to the insect life specifically, the heroes and the villains? So heroes and villains of the insect world. We have a lot of beautiful insects and a lot of really ugly insects, and insects that do beautiful things and do ugly things. So we're just going to talk about a few of them to kind of give you a representative overview of this group. And we're going to learn several different orders. And when we talk about orders, I want you to pay attention to the wing morphology, the mouth part morphology, and the developmental stage. These three traits, wings, mouth parts, and development, these are going to be how we distinguish orders from each other, by and large. So our first order within class Insecta is order Lepidoptera. And you'll notice that most of these orders end in patera, and this is wing, and most of them end in optera, which means they have wings. Some of the other ones end in aptera, which means without wings. So pay attention to the suffix here at the end of the order. Lepidopterans are butterflies and moths. Lepido means scales. So if you look really closely at a butterfly or moth wing, they actually have thousands of little tiny scales, and this is what helps give them their pigment and some of their amazing elaborate coloration. What we have here is before I get into the specific moth, Lepidopterans have scaly wings. They have holometabolous development, which is obvious, so caterpillar, pupa, chrysalis, cocoon, and then adult. And then their mouth parts are maxilla only and used for slurping up nectar or sometimes blood or decaying matter, plant tissue from their food. All right, so now this moth specifically is the Brahmin moth. Brahmea is the genus. One of the largest, most beautiful moths in Earth's history, and it's nocturnal, as most moths are. You can see the nice plumose antenna. It spends most of its day camouflaged against tree bark. And as caterpillars, they're also pretty spectacular. And what do you imagine other insects think when they see these nice elongated black spines? This is probably going to be a toxic caterpillar. So Brahmea caterpillars have a remarkable ability to take the toxins that their host plant produces to actually defend themselves from caterpillars. These caterpillars take those toxins, modify them a little bit, and then ship them off to their epidermal cuticle and to give them protection. So these caterpillars use the plant toxins for their own defense, which is pretty remarkable. So this is Brahmea moth, and you should know general morphology, synapomorphies of Lepidoptera. You should know this is holometabolous. You should know plumose antennae, good pheromone catchers, and you should know that the caterpillars sequester toxins from their host plants. Similarly, Danaus plexippus, this is the monarch butterfly, and these are rather famous for their toxicity. And these sequester plant toxins from their host plants as well, their milkweed host plants. And their caterpillars are quite gorgeous as well, but I don't have a picture. You'll just have to imagine it. Just think about a beautiful, beautiful caterpillar, and that's what the monarch caterpillar looks like. Monarchs are also famous because they migrate a spectacular distance. So even though they can only fly about 6 miles per hour, they make a journey of thousands of miles from northern North America all the way down to Mexico to breed. And what's even more fascinating is that this is a transgenerational migration. So it's such a long distance that an adult will start the migration in, let's say, Maine or something, and then maybe make it all the way to Tennessee, and before they die of old age, and then the next offspring are born in Tennessee, and then that offspring knows whether or not they're going south or north. And we're not sure, 100% sure how they know where their parents were headed. Probably has to do with some kind of temperature or daylight sensing in their brains. But regardless, they continue the journey that their parents started, or maybe even their grandparents. So these are really remarkable animals. Another thing that makes monarchs famous is their mimicry. This right here is the viceroy butterfly, very similar species, found in very similar habitats. And what is the difference between a monarch and a viceroy? They both have orange backgrounds with black veins and black wing margins. If you're a bird, these look very similar. And both of these species are actually toxic, and so if you eat one, you're going to avoid all of these black and orange butterflies. So what kind of mimicry would this be? This would be Mullerian, where you have two harmful species mimicking each other, kind of doubling their aposematic power. So when you look at these, I want you to pay most attention to these wing bars on their hind wings. The viceroy has them, the monarch does not, they're absent. So there are other ways to tell, but that's the easiest. The bars, the cross bars on the hind wings of the viceroy versus empty on the monarch. Mullerian mimic, transgenerational migration, Danaus plexipus. This one's a pretty easy order to remember. The genus is Mantis, the common name is Mantis, the order is Mantodea. So these are pretty easy ones to remember. Specifically, this is the orchid mantis, a really beautiful, highly camouflaged ambush predator. And if you notice, all the elaborate ornamentation on his hind legs make him look like a flower, little petals. And he has raptorial forelegs that can slash out really quickly and grab onto prey, which he then eats alive with his mandibles. And so the orchid mantis in general, are hemimetabolists. They have mandibulate mouth parts, and their wings are usually folded over their back and kind of leathery. Their forewings are very leathery. And they're ambush predators. So this results in some really remarkable camouflage. This one looks just so much like a leaf, right? Even it's got kind of the decayed edges, almost like you have little bite marks from the leaf, or just decayed. And here's one that looks like a healthy leaf, but it looks like a healthy leaf. So mantids are remarkably adapted to ambush-style predation, such that they just kind of blend perfectly into their surroundings. So order Mantodea, genus Mantis. Common name here is the orchid mantis, mandibulate mouth parts, leathery forewings, and hemimetabolous development. All right, order Hymenoptera. Hymen means membrane, and optera means wing. So these are the membrane-winged insects, and they have two membranous wings, the forewings and the hind wings. And hymenopterans are going to include the bees, like this Apis mellifera, the honeybee. They're also going to include wasps and ants. The honeybee is one of our great heroes of the insect world. The honeybee is an incredibly important pollinator, and it was the honeybee's extinction that led to the collapse of many, many ecosystems around the world. So Apis mellifera is the honeybee, and these bees are really incredible. They work incredibly hard. You can see these little pollen clusters that they've gathered as they go from flower to flower, and they're gaining little bits of nectar and pollen, which they will take back to their hive and transform into honey, and the honey will sustain the whole colony throughout the winter. If they don't get enough honey, then the colony dies. So they spend their whole spring and summer and early fall collecting and making honey just to survive the winter. Really incredible creatures and really important pollinators. One of the most spectacular of the wasps is Megarissa, the giant ichneumon wasp in family Ichneumonidae. Ichneumon wasps are parasitoids, and if you look at the coloration, this might seem like an organism you wouldn't want to mess with. It's got the coloration of one of the paper wasps that are kind of dangerous and highly aggressive. But the giant ichneumon wasp is neither aggressive nor dangerous. Unless you're a bark beetle. So these guys lay eggs inside bark beetles, which are themselves inside, sometimes deep inside trees. And so to find the host, they use these incredibly long antennae to sense them out, and then they have special sensilla on their tarsi of their feet to feel vibrations under the surface. And then look at this spectacular thing right here. What is that? So this is the ovipositor of Megarissa, and ovipositor is an egg-laying device. And you guys are all familiar that bees and wasps sting, but what is their stinger? Their stinger is an ovipositor. The purpose of the stinger is to lay eggs. So it's been adapted for laying venom, and so it has specialized poison glands as well, and it's pointy and stabby. But ovipositors are kind of the ancestral state, and they're not stingers. They're just egg-laying devices. This particular one is tipped with a drill bit, really sharp, hard drill bit, and it will bore through solid wood to get to the bark beetle larva inside. And then the egg passes down this huge, long tunnel-like ovipositor, and then the larva eats the bark beetle from the inside out. So the giant ichneumon wasp is a parasitoid of bark beetles, really long antenna, spectacular ovipositor, aposematic coloration, but this is a Batesian mimic. They're harmless, and they're mimicking harmful species. One of my favorite insects is Acromyrmex. These are leafcutter ants, and leafcutter ants are spectacular. They can, if you look at their heads look really bulky. They have extensive musculature inside their heads connecting to their jaws so that they can chop up leaves all day long, and leaves can be pretty tough. And a whole colony of these can go up to a tree and completely shred the leaves from a tree. So you go to bed and there's a tree there next to your tent, and the next morning all the little bits of the leaves are scattered throughout on the ground beneath the canopy of the trees. So they climb up, chop up leaves, and carry them down to their colony. Several strange things about this. First of all, they don't eat the leaves. They're not phytophagous animals. So what are they doing all this work for? Well, these guys are actually farmers. They have an expansive colony of fungus deep inside their nest, and they bring the leaves back to feed their little fungus animals. And so they coat the leaves with antibiotic saliva so that their colony doesn't get infections, and then they chop it up and stuff it inside this growing mound of fungus. And then the fungus produces spores that the ants find delicious. And so it's this incredible relationship between the fungus and the ants. The second strange thing here is that you may notice you have this industrious worker ant here, here, and here, and then you have these little hitchhikers on top. What are those smaller ants doing? What is their purpose? Are they just lazy ants going for a ride? By no means. There's very rarely a lazy ant in a colony. What these guys are doing, there is a horrible nightmare for these leafcutter ants, and that is the decapitating fly. There is a specific fly that sees these long trails of leafcutter ants, these massive rivers of leaves moving through the trees, and they know that is a perfect spot to find a host to lay my eggs. So this fly comes in and lays an egg right at the base of the skull, and then the larva burrows in and eats away the ant's insides, eventually pops the head off like this, and then pupates inside the empty head casing of the ant, and then emerges as an adult fly. So the decapitating ant and the decapitating fly and the leafcutter ants are mortal enemies, locked perpetually in combat. And so these little hitchhikers here are explicitly, their job is to defend against these parasitic Air Force attacks from the decapitating fly. So they are smaller, lighter, quicker. Their jaws are free, so they can defend their larger leafcutter comrades from attacks from above. Fascinating story. And a real one, which makes it even better. Now, what kind of insect is this? That doesn't look like much of an insect. It looks like nothing. This is in order Siphonaptera. So pay attention to the way the suffix on this order. Aptera means wingless, and siphon, means siphon. So these are slurping insects without wings. And Tunga penetrans is the genus and species. These are fleas. So order Siphonaptera contains the fleas. And you may be familiar with human fleas or dog fleas or cat fleas. So I'm not going to talk about those boring ones. I'm going to talk about this one, which is a particularly gruesome parasite. Tunga penetrans is the chigoe flea. And what you see here is a female flea. And you may know about fleas that they are typically, I'll show you a picture here. This is the chigoe flea female, and this is the chigoe flea male. And the male looks like a typical flea. It's going to be laterally compressed, and so it kind of wiggle through mammalian hair or bird feathers and find a good spot to drink your blood. The female is this bulbous, strange thing. So why is the female so bulbous and looks like just this mound of weird, gross stuff? This right here is her abdomen. Her head is on the other side, and this is her whole bulbous body there. Chigoe fleas live in sandy environments, and whenever someone or an animal or a person walks along with bare feet, they jump up and burrow into the flesh of their host. So mainly feet and ankles, lower limbs are affected. Once inside the host, she expands to this bulbous size as she consumes the flesh and tissue beneath the skin. And the only thing, so she's stuck in head first, and the only thing left outside is her abdomen. So the males will come and mate, and she will become large with many eggs, which then just kind of dribble out the back there into the sand, and it makes it very difficult to remove her from the host. So it's kind of an interesting adaptation. Like I said, mainly fleas are laterally compressed and they're ectoparasites, but this is kind of a way to avoid getting scraped off by becoming an endoparasite. The next picture is a little gross, so fair warning. This is feet of someone who's been infected with dozens of chigoe fleas, and you can see the round circles there. There are little female bodies in each of these holes. And the worst part about this is that the female actually doesn't ever or rarely leaves its host. So often she will die in the host, and then you have a little sore open wound with a dead decaying insect in it. And so infection is the worst part of this, and it can lead to death. Mainly it's kind of debilitating, incredibly painful, and scarring, just physically and mentally. So this is the chigoe flea found in neotropical sandy areas along riverbanks or beaches, and this is Tunga penetrans, order Siphonaptera. Another villain of human history is Pediculus, ridiculous Pediculus. This is the human headlouse in order Phythoraptera. Again, Aptera without wings. I have no idea what Pithera means, but these are lice. And the human headlouse, humans actually have two different kinds of lice, headlouse and pubic lice. And you can imagine here, so they're wingless. I should have mentioned this with the fleas too. So parasitic insects tend to have atrophied or reduced wings, because why do you need wings if you just live on a host? Wings would just kind of get in the way. So most of the apterans are going to be parasitic. So lice have these incredibly specialized claws that they use to grip the hair of their hosts, and they live usually their whole life on a single host. Some species will use multiple hosts, but typically they live and lay eggs on one host, and they can get transferred through clothes or hands or combs or something like that. So lice can breed pretty prolifically when they get into a good habitat, and even more devastatingly, they transmit a disease. It is a bacterium, I think, but don't quote me on that, called typhus. I think it's bacterium. But it's an incredibly damaging disease, and it's killed literally millions of people throughout history. So typhus is transmitted by lice. And as I said, we have head lice that look like this. We also have pubic lice that look like this. And their legs are modified because of the different environment. So they have different adaptations to their specific hosts. And pubic lice are sexually transmitted and also carry diseases. So these are disease-carrying, wingless hemimetabolists. I don't think I mentioned fleas, but lice are hemimetabolists, and they don't have wings. So pediculus is the head louse. All right, now here is yet another villain of our human history, something that most people would not be too upset if it went extinct. So this is an order Hemiptera. These are insects with piercing, sucking mouth parts. You can see a really nice one here. These are haustellate mouth parts. So they have mandibles and maxilla, labrum and labium, all the components of a mouth part, but they're for piercing and sucking. Hemiptera means half wing, and so if these wings were kind of spread open, you would see half of their forewing is kind of hardened, sclerotized, leathery, and then half of it is membranous. This is what Hemiptera refers to. Rhodnius is the kissing bug, but it's not called the kissing bug because it is nice. It's not the nice kind of kissing. These are the bugs that we have talked about earlier in the semester because they transmit Trypanosoma cruzi in South America, and they cause a disease. Trypanosomes cause a disease called Chagas disease, and thousands of people die annually from this disease, and it is one of the leading parasitic protozoan infections in the world, and it's all caused by Rhodnius and its parasite Trypanosoma. The next hemipteran is the bedbugs. So we're getting a bunch of villains right in a row here. Cymex is the bedbug, and again we notice a lack of wings, and we notice dorso-ventrally flattened body shape. And hemipterans are hemimetabolists with haustellate mouth parts, and bedbugs are, in some respects, the worst parasites because they're incredibly difficult to get rid of. Their eggs can withstand extremely hot and cold temperatures, and the adults seek out shelter in the smallest crevices behind paintings or in between mattresses or in cracks along the floorboards. So they're very, very difficult to get rid of. But in some ways, they're a really nice parasite. That's kind of a contradiction in terms, but they don't transmit diseases. So as far as we know, they don't transmit any bacteria or viruses, excuse me, or protozoans that cause significant human health problems. So as far as parasites go, they're not the worst to get, but they are pretty nasty. And they can tell by your metabolism, by your respiration rate, when you're sleeping, and so they wait in the walls until you're sleeping, and then they all crawl down and feed on your flesh, drink your blood, and then crawl back into their homes before you wake up. So it's kind of a nighttime, nocturnal, blood-feeding, vampiric insect, and the most damage it causes is if you are allergic and can cause some pretty severe allergic reactions, as you can see here. Our next order is the Coleoptera, and Coleoptera are the beetles. The beetles have a hardened elytra as forewings, so this nice shiny shell. That's actually the forewings of the beetles. And we should be able to identify what these are and what these are. These are easy. Antenna. These are maxillary palps, and these are labial palps. So remember, the mouth parts are going to have the two different mouth parts will have palps, the maxilla and then the labium. And the maxillary palps are usually longer, more extensive, and the labial palps are on the ventral, toward the ventral side, or the posterior side. Harmonia is the ladybug, and I should mention about the hemipterans. Those are true bugs. So when you say ladybug, that's not technically correct, because bugs are only that which belongs to order Hemiptera. Harmonia is the lady beetle, but I'm not pedantic about that. If you want to call it ladybug, that's its common name, that's fine with me, as long as you know that true bugs are only found in Hemiptera. Harmonia is a beneficial insect, so here we have a hero, and ironically it's a hero because it's a villain to other insects, particularly crop pests. So ladybugs are voracious predators of aphids and other garden pests, and so they're often released to control biologically the spread of agricultural pests. So in that respect, they are incredibly beneficial to humans, as they protect our food sources. One interesting thing about Harmonia is that they aggregate during the winter. So during the winter, they release a pheromone, and they all aggregate together in these gigantic clumps wherever they can find each other. And usually the outer layer kind of freezes, and the inner layer then gets the warmth from the bodies and can survive. So it's a kind of an interesting way to survive the winter as adults. Most insects will survive the winter as either eggs or pupa, but ladybugs do it as adults all together. And now one of my favorite groups and one of my favorite species. This is order Diptera. Di means two, and so if you look at their wings, they only have one pair. They have one pair of wings instead of two. So a lot of the flies, so Diptera are flies. A lot of flies look very similar to wasps. There's a lot of Batesian mimicry between the harmless flies and the harmful wasps. And so to differentiate these, focus on the wings. The dipterans are only going to have one pair. The wasps and their relatives will have two. Flies have something called halteres down here, which are kind of the remnants of their hind wings, and they're kind of like little gyroscopic things that they use for equilibrium and balance as they fly, but you can't really see them on this picture. Trichopoda pinnipes is the feather-footed fly, and it's named that because of these long bristles on the hind legs, and they kind of look like feathers. And Trichopoda pinnipes is another hero. This is a pollinator, and it can mainly be found on white or yellow flowers in the late fall. It is also a parasitoid, and it parasitizes stink bugs like the green stink bug or the marmorated stink bug. And the stink bugs are important crop pests, especially in orchards, so pears and apples. This guy, the brown marmorated, for orchards. The green stink bug is an important pest of soybeans and green beans and all those kinds of leguminous crops. So the Trichopoda pinnipes is similar to Harmonia, the ladybug. This is a beneficial insect because it controls populations of crop pests. So this is one we would like to keep around. One we would probably not like to keep around is Dermatobia hominis. And what do you suppose this fly is? This is the larva. You can see two nice spear-like mandibles up here. You have these circlets of recurved spines, and then you have little anal spiracles here for breathing. So where do you imagine this guy's living? This is the human botfly, and it's living underneath the skin with just its little butt showing of a large mammal host. So think cattle, deer, and humans primarily. So Dermatobia hominis is the human botfly. As adults, this is what they look like. These are really incredibly fast flyers, and the adults actually don't have mouth parts. They don't live very long. They essentially just live to a few days to find a mate, find a host, and reproduce and die. Now, to find a host, this is pretty phenomenal. So, say that they're going to attack a cow. The cows have learned to associate the wing beat frequencies, the sound of the buzzing of a botfly, with incredible pain as the botflies burrow under their skin. So whenever the cattle hear that sound, they stampede away. And so as kind of a defense mechanism against the botfly. So what the botfly does is they find a carrier insect, a little transporter insect, to carry the eggs for them. So this giant botfly will track down a horsefly or a mosquito, wrestle it to the ground, and lay a bunch of eggs on the smaller fly. And then the smaller fly will go to the cow to get a nice drink of blood. And once it lands, the heat from the host will activate the hatching of the botfly eggs, and the larvae will then drop from the mosquito to the cows and start burrowing in. So just remarkable. And it's remarkable even that we figured this out. I mean, who's out there with a camera filming mosquitoes flying around a pasture? But we found some that were full of botfly eggs, and we actually have some film of botflies doing this, of laying eggs on flies, and then the flies going to the cows. Really remarkable adaptation, but a really horrible practice for sure. The next picture is one that's being extracted from a human, so a little bit disturbing. Here's one that's been laid in the eye of a human. And FYI, they're going to look for places that are soft and for easy burrowing, so around the nose, mouth, eyes. In the American Southwest, where you have the kind of the characteristic cowboy bandana covering the mouth and nose. A lot of that was to keep dust away during long cattle drives, but while they were sleeping, that was important for keeping botflies out of their mouth and nose. Not pleasant. This is the most villainous of all insects, Anopheles gambii. This is the malaria mosquito, the mosquito that transmits Plasmodium that causes malaria. And you can see the nice piercing mouth part slurping up blood. Only females will drink blood, and they need the blood meal to lay eggs. So most of the males either are too short-lived to really feed very much, or they drink nectar or other plant juices. So the malaria mosquito has actually killed more humans, estimated, roughly estimated, but roughly estimated they've killed more humans by themselves than, or I should say with Plasmodium. So Plasmodium and Anopheles have killed more humans by themselves than every war in human history combined. So if you look at annual death statistics from the beginning of the second millennium, annually humans cause a little less than 500,000 deaths, and mosquitoes cause 725,000 deaths annually, just from mosquitoes and the parasites, the viruses they carry. So it's not just Plasmodium, it's yellow fever and West Nile and a lot of other viruses as well, but primarily this is Plasmodium. If you look down this list, this is a really pretty interesting list. We've talked about most of these already, but we have the assassin bug, the Rhodnius, that causes Chagas disease on there. We have the tsetse fly, which I'll talk about next, that causes sleeping sickness. And we have the parasites that we talked about here. All the animals we think are really dangerous are not really statistically very dangerous. It's the mosquito that is the great villain. So if we come to this planet and there are mosquito-like organisms here that could transmit parasites like malaria here, what should we do? Should we use broad-spectrum insecticides and kill both the mosquito and the feather-footed fly? Should we let the mosquitoes live because we don't want to kill the feather-footed fly? or should we target the mosquito by itself? And if so, how do we do that? Those are the questions I want you to be thinking about. Our last one for the day is Glossina, the tsetse fly. This is a fly that was native to Africa and transmitted Trypanosoma brucei, the little unicellular organism that causes sleeping sickness. So it has specialized mouth parts for slicing open your skin and then drinking your blood, and then the trypanosomes are injected through the saliva. One very curious thing about these flies is they incubate their young. So the vast majority of insects would have a type 3 survivorship curve, right? They're going to have a lot of offspring, and the vast majority of these offspring will die. They will not reach adulthood. Well, the tsetse fly goes in the opposite direction, and instead of having a whole bunch of offspring, they have only a few, really only one at a time. And they have a modified uterus that incubates this larva through all its instars until it's ready to pupate. And so the adult protects it, feeds it, provides for it as it grows. It even has a specialized a lactation gland for feeding the larva, a milk-like substance. So these are kind of one of the only non-mammalian organisms that produce a milk-like substance for their offspring. And it's a parasitic fly. Very, very strange, very unusual. And that's really all we need to know about order Diptera. This is the tsetse fly, genus Glossina. And what I want you to be thinking about is all of these good animals and bad animals. What is our responsibility to them as we look at this new world?